We are recording this. We don't like that. Yes, you can
Don't
leave.
say it, you don't.
But it's helpful so we can share it with other people and people can go back and watch it. So we do that every time. But thank you for attending. It's nice to see everyone. Thank you for everyone that came in person, even though it's raining and cats and dogs outside. I appreciate it. We have some exciting things to share with you, and then I'm hoping to use a lot of the time just for open discussion, which I find very valuable between staff and you all. And I gave you a little homework this week, so hopefully you looked at it. And I did get some responses, and I'm hoping to have a robust discussion about your feelings about our codes and processes, which I'm sure you all think about all the time. And with that, so we have a few new employees that we want to introduce. I'll give a few updates, and then we'll talk through some of the new ADU and subdivision regulations, and then open up to the roundtable discussion. So first, want to introduce a very large photo of him. He's also right here. So want to introduce Gabriel. He is the new supervising civil engineer, and so this position has been vacant for almost a year. Huge deal that we have this. This is a really important position in community development for all of the development projects we do. Along with Gabriel, who I'll let speak in a second, we actually have fully staffed up that team, which has not been fully staffed for at least a year and a half since I've been here. So this is really, really exciting, and I think a great time for us to build some engineering capacity in community development. With that, Dave, if you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I won't take much of your time. Just thank you for having me. Looking forward to working with each of you. As Timmy mentioned, we're fully staffed, which is exciting for our team. I know that a lot of what we do touches a lot of what you all are trying to do in the community with your projects. So please use this as a resource. Reach out to me. I can get you my contact info or card if you need it, and we're just here to help in any way we can.
Thank you, Gabriel. And then we also have Josh. So Josh Daniel is our new fire marshal. So Josh, if you want to say a few words, we're very excited you're here and you're an instrumental person in this group as well.
Thanks, Timmy. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. My name's Josh. Come from the Valley, and now I'm over here in Paradise, and so it's good to be here.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me.
If you want to come visit him again and say hello and clap for him on Tuesday the 18th, we'll be introducing him before council, so you can come and cheer him on there too.
That's pretty good.
So just a few updates from me. I wanted to cover some of the things that are going on citywide. We had a planning commission last night. The planning team will dive into that later, and that was to mostly discuss the ADU and subdivision regulation changes. That process will continue. I want to talk about it today, and then it will go to council in early March. And before those changes are then submitted to the state. The main reason for those changes for relooking at that code section was we got a letter from the state with deficiencies in our code language, and then we took that opportunity to also change some of the low-hanging fruit things we have all discussed about being difficult things in these code sections. I want to know, this is an iterative process, so as we continue to talk about it, when we hear other issues from you of well, what about this thing, and what about the height, and we're making note of all of those things because we anticipate kind of a second round cleanup redo of some of the ADU regulations as well. So that's part of this conversation, is picking up those little pieces separate and apart from just requiring things being required in state law of what can we do above and beyond to help facilitate the development. We also have on March 4th at council an appeal of Waterman Village. This is the kind of tiny home development on Dana Street. So that will be on March 4th, along with the ADU regulations. We have on April 1st an initiation hearing for Broadstone Village. Broadstone. That's a kind of the Strawberry Fields properties on Los Osos Valley Road. So that would be initiating an annexation for some land over there associated with a housing project. And then just kind of overarching, what else is going on in the city? I think you're all aware, and I saw many of you at the community forum, but the ongoing budget planning discussions that are happening that will feed into the next 2-year budget cycle. Thank you for all of you that participated online and at the community forum. It was a really good turnout. On Saturday, there was a city council meeting to further refine the city goals. I think relevant to this group, there were a few city goals that were added, and housing and homelessness, which is currently a city goal, was moved into 2 separate city goals. One is homelessness response, which is meant to capture, both providing services, to address the unhoused population and also addressing the impacts of the unhoused population on the community. So that's one of them. The other is now housing and kind of neighborhood wellness are one topic. And the title has been changed and it's kind of still in progress, but it's housing and neighborhood wellness, safe, affordable, livable. And so it's kind of a major city goal getting at, affordable, facilitating housing, facilitating affordable housing, facilitating safe, kind of connected and livable neighborhoods for all. This is coming from some of the comments we're receiving about neighborhood wellness, and there's some town gown issues near Cal Poly with kind of students versus longtime residents using neighborhoods in different ways. And so that's really the big changes for this group. Yes, John.
Right. I'd like to make a comment about the major city goals, and I can wait till after you're done. I want to be polite.
No, sorry, go ahead.
So I think what occurs to me about the major city goals is that while this room, is focusing on the H's, I do think that there's a conversation about infill housing and the way that we develop that affects all of the major city goals.
Mhm.
And so I don't know, like at the budget meeting, I got in Bob Hill's ear about, just it was really a good example, because in front of me was a guy like just hammering him about these bird populations and plant populations around San Luis Obispo and how this special designated zone. And it feels like there's some thoughtful development that we could do that would help all the departments in their city goals. And so I don't know if there's a way that we can start talking about our policies with all the city goals and ranking, like, oh, this supports our green initiative. This supports having not sprawl. This supports diversity, right? But it feels like there's a little bit of a mix there that it would be good to see that the whole, organization of the city understanding that there's ways that projects can support all the city goals or more of them than just housing and homelessness.
I love that comment, and I think yes. And that's definitely something I will keep in mind as we craft our work program items. I think one thing that you will like for the change in the major city goals, believe it or not, is for this housing one of the first bullet points is like something like, and we're still wordsmithing, but continue to facilitate housing options and, for all in alignment with our sustainability, climate, and housing goals. So kind of taking this idea that it's not exactly that. We need to look at it and say, like, what is the best path forward, and how do we look at it holistically in terms of all of the goals we have? But I think that's a really great comment, is we can't look at things as like, this is just meeting the housing goal. Like infill housing is helping us maintain our green belt. It's helping us be more sustainable. It's helping us with economic development because now we have vibrant mixed use neighborhoods, right? So I think it's helping us with DEI because we're providing more accessibility to all members of the community. I think that's a really, really good comment and something we'll keep in mind.
Yeah, my quick comment, when I saw that announced, I was like, it sounds a little NIMBY-ish, like the way that particular housing, like it just
With the neighborhood
wellness and everything, it sounded like maybe a step back. And then the other thing is the affordable thing I love, and it's what I'm passionate about it, but I also like, there's so much research out there that we still have to produce high-end home housing also. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of great research that when you produce that, it creates this whole domino effect that frees up other housing that is now being occupied by higher income people. And so I just always love to not lose sight of that we need to build all the types of housing.
Yeah, I think those are valuable comments. I don't disagree with you. I think the council had a very challenging situation of both trying to kind of keep housing at the forefront, but recognize, you know, and the neighborhood wellness challenges that are happening, and those aren't, I don't think necessarily related to development, it's more the activities happening in the neighborhoods. But I think we can be really cognizant of making sure that doesn't come across as NIMBY. Because it has changed in a way that maybe is not as clear as housing, right? It's housing and neighborhood wellness. So that's a valuable comment. I think what we can do is, again, the real meat, I think, lies in the work program items. Like, obviously, the name of the goal is important, the action items we have, but what is staff going to do about them, I think, is really where there's a lot of attention that needs to be paid to make sure that those items are getting at making sure we're still moving in the direction of supporting all housing. And we are, I'll kind of relook at the action item bullet points and make sure, I think it says housing for all. I mean, we're gonna keep pushing this idea, we need all of it, right? Not just, but there is a special attention paid to the affordable aspect.
Can we just also throw in there health and safety when you're talking about sprawl versus dense infill? We've seen what sprawl can do in LA as far as health and safety goes and fire. It's just for so many different reasons, so many different ethical reasons and different departments it touches. Infill is so much smarter than sprawl.
Yeah,
And I know, like last night at the planning commission, there was a woman from Oasis who suggested that these ADUs should be following, rather than capping it at 25, it should follow the density, like whatever that should be, you know, for R3, I think it's 35, or R2, 35. It should follow the density and not, you know, not just a blind cap across the board. I think I had not thought of that before she said it, and it makes sense. And if we really want to touch on all these points and try to fix things in a holistic way, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I don't know, Chief Tuggle, if you want to speak to, you know, there was kind of renewed interest, not renewed, but the council did articulate this idea that they really want to focus also on like emergency management and making sure the community is safe. And so I think that goes to John Chicamo's comment about the housing piece touches all of it, and we can kind of keep coming back to that and saying like, hey, this obviously meets the housing goal, but here's how, you know, these changes or focusing on this area or making infill easier can meet all of the goals.
Yeah, I think to your point, Timmy, and I think to your point, I think the language that we'll use for council's effort at fuels mitigation and vegetation management is going to be a concerted effort in that direction, where we've taken on the acquisition and the sort of the enhancement of our open space. I think we're at the point now where we need to start thinking about fuels and the vegetation management of it. I think the other thing that, to your point, and it's really going to feed into this concept of, I think, sprawl, is the idea of the Firehouse Severity Zone maps that are scheduled to come out March 10th. And those are going to have a pretty big impact on what growth looks like on the fringes of where it butts up against those open spaces. As we start looking into our LRA maps that are going to place a pretty significantly larger chunk of LRA in the very high fire hazard severity, that will change the dynamics of what's required to build in those adjacent areas to the wildland or to the WUI. So even though we do have a community at risk status in the city that applies some of the 7A requirements to building, when you start getting into the actual WUI, that there are even more requirements. So I think that'll be something for y'all to keep a very close eye on as we move forward in the next about 6 months as we get the fire code adoption and building code adoption in October, November. But those are great points.
Are those city maps or are those like CAL FIRE maps or?
So they come from the state, but so the SRA maps already came out. They came out at October. The LRA maps, both the cities and the locally responsible areas for the county, those come out March 10th.
And that's inherently the city.
The city and the county, unincorporated area of the county, exactly.
And I think what will be interesting is we have the maps coming out, we have that change, and then we're gonna follow closely with the housing element process. We are going to be mandated to accommodate additional units, so I think that will inherently push our need to look at infill seriously, and like really how can we accommodate these units without continuing to expand. So I think it will actually help kind of push things in, as we should, I think.
I think from a design standpoint, when you're trying to fit an ADU in, say, in an R2, R3, and you can't do this, which you normally would be allowed to do this, that height requirement or that height allotment is there, but with an ADU you can't, then you're doing this, and then all of the buildings and all of the lots are so close to each other and harder to manage.
Yeah.
And then also just, if this is our community, this much vegetation is a lot harder to manage than this much vegetation to keep, keep those fires out.
Yeah. And
It
those
seems
kind of,
that way.
those types of comments are exactly what we want to hear for, okay, what else could we do, right? Again, we're focused on complying with state law, getting rid of the matching style, those things, but like, what else could we do within reason? And I think that's a really good example of meeting our city goals. It's making the process make more sense. So we're taking note of all of those.
Could be a totally different topic, but the whole wedding cake setback issue
Yeah, that-
is a very hard constraint for a
Yeah.
designer.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like it leads to like better design, and I don't know if it really has that much impact if we just design it properly for fire mitigation. It's kind of funny, like looking at, not funny, but like the Palisades and some of the houses that survived it, like a lot of these kind of architectural frills and overhangs of stuff that maybe contemporary design doesn't have, those structures kind of held up better than others.
The
Right?
wedding
Well, the wedding cake's more of a rain mitigation issue. Like I've had projects that have had water issues because the ARC wants you to have this 6-inch little lap in stucco because of this wedding cake, and that's just a point of water infiltration that's just really hard to, you use all the best materials, and it's like, I don't know, like,
There's a really good local example of that. So at Terraza, the Bridge Street that, where we finished, they had a fire burn all the way to those houses, like almost set architectural ironworks on fire. I don't know if you remember that. So there's a neighborhood on Bridge Street at the end of Bridge Street. And those are all TPO roofs,
yeah.
stucco all the way up, and they performed. None of them got caught on fire, but I mean, my understanding was that the fire came all the way to the houses. And so that is a really good point about fire safety through design versus just the double pane windows and the, not having all these little, decks and flat roofs where ambers can land.
Yeah.
Right, like the manse, might catch on fire pretty easy.
yeah. And we don't want these like utilitarian looking boxes either, but I feel like we have a community that has really great designers, and like, I feel like they're still not gonna just create blah stuff, but like, it's very hard.
Yeah.
The wedding cake thing is a very hard issue to like go up against.
Yeah.
So,
And we're kind of hearing comments coalesce around certain themes. That's definitely one of them. The height is one of them. So these are things we're taking note of, for the second batch of changes are these things we want to explore. As we talk about the budget, I think I have to bring up the fact that if you've been at any of the council meetings, you've heard it. We're projecting, potential deficit in the out years for the budget. And so we're being very conservative with budgeting for the next 2-year cycle. What that would look like for community development is we have to just be more creative with how we get things done. We probably will have to do more with less. So one of the things we're working on right now is looking at our budget and making sure our next 2 years matches our past 2 years in terms of what our budget is, so not having increases. That potentially will impact our ability to do some big picture stuff. We're gonna see how we can work around that where possible, you know, maybe we just pick away at things as we have time as staff instead of doing things more holistically. I think also it's worth noting, you know, we are anticipating that our revenues at the counter, like our permit revenues, are gonna be down $2 million from what we thought they would be at the end of this year. And last year we hit it almost exactly on the dot. And so just this year, things have kind of just fallen off the cliff. That, you know, has some benefits, which is we can get through things faster, there's less of a delay with some things because we're not drowning in a backlog of things. But our, you know, a lot of our consultant budget is based on what we bring in from those revenues. And so those consultant budget is how we're able to send some things out and get them done faster. And we'll just be more limited in that in the next 2 years. We are anticipating conservatively kind of our revenues staying a little bit where they are right now. Things are so uncertain. Interest rates are still high, tariff conversations, things like that. So we're taking a conservative look at things, but I just wanted to bring that up, you know. I think this group will be really valuable as we move through these next 2 years to figure out how do we just get scrappier at the city and like pick away at some of the ordinance changes as we have time, you know, with cleanups, but we might not be able to do some of the big picture dreaming that I wanted to do of, you know, let's do an overhaul of this section of the zoning code where we need consultant help. We're just gonna have to figure out how to do it. I have been talking to Cal Poly and some architects about like, could we harness Cal Poly energy to get some work done? You know, there's things we can do, but there's also, we're gonna have to kick off the housing element process, kind of probably at the end-ish of this 2-year budget cycle. That's gonna take a lot of staff time and resources, but I think again, this team will be really valuable with that. I do think, to Todd's point, there's a lot of synergy between zoning code stuff and fire safety that we're probably gonna wanna dive into over the next 2 years, which is really, you know, kind of an exciting space where we can do a lot of stuff, but it also requires time and energy and thought to go into that. But I just wanted to kind of throw that out there of, you know, we are still gonna be chugging along, doing the very best we can and getting things done, but it might look a little different than it did in the last 2-year budget cycle. For community development in particular, some of the big things we heard at council too is they focus on kind of neighborhood wellness. They may be interested in safe housing regulations. So that does take up resources in the department. If we have to look at, you know, code changes or programs for safe housing, and that can range from, people have talked about a rental registry, people have talked about just additional codes and code enforcement for, you know, safe habitable housing. They've talked about rent control. Right now, we don't know what they mean, but there's a spectrum of things, but that also would be community development resources kind of going into that effort. And so, you know, we will do our very best not to lose sight of like the housing production piece and the low hanging fruit, how can we change things, but depending on where our work program items land, we'll just have to see kind of where the resources are in the department.
I'm just looking for a little clarification about like moving forward and because you guys have touched on this subject, but so the inclusionary fee or the affordable housing fee, 2019, I guess if you were developing any single family homes, if it was 4 or less, there wasn't one, but then over that. And then in 2022, everything proposal, I know why stuff. And then we're looking at those costs and stuff like that, you know, within the building. But, you know, Berkeley got that turned, you know, over, you know, on a appeal process. And does that get adopted down here? I mean, what is the status of how you guys look at the affordable housing fee today?
So I am not familiar necessarily with the Berkeley, when did that?
So that just happened a couple months ago.
Okay.
You know, so basically they got sued about doing that.
Uh-huh.
And Berkeley, you know, also had like the gas thing, where they wanted to make all of the homes electric, and then the city here adopted that.
Yeah.
And then they got it turned over on appeal, and then you guys pulled back from that
Yeah.
as well. Same kind of thing. I'm just wondering if you guys are doing that as well, or?
I have heard nothing about implications of
Okay.
Berkeley decision on affordable housing fees, but we should definitely talk to the city attorney, but right now, our affordable housing fee, like
Yes.
inclusionary fee is
Right.
still
Still
in
active.
existence.
Active.
And I think there was a question, it was probably you through email of like, what does that do? And that is an impact fee that feeds directly into like production of affordable housing units. So we take that money, we pull it aside in its own pot of money, and then
Right.
if there are projects that we approve, like Haslo or people's projects, and sometimes they ask the city for, they say, hey, we need 600,000 to get this one going. That money feeds directly into
I see.
the affordable housing unit production.
Okay.
But we will explore that, that's interesting to know.
Well, it's just because you guys, when it happened with the gas thing, you guys adopted what the court came through.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if that was still gonna be the case.
I have not heard anything from the city attorneys, but I will ask.
Okay.
Cool. All right, good, yes, yeah.
So permits, or I guess permit fees and permits have been down the last year or last?
It honestly was like July 1st. It just, like the beginning of this fiscal year, kind of took a dive. And so it's, I thought maybe it was like, okay, like the election's coming up, things are slow. We thought maybe that would change things, interest rates were high. Our permit user fees didn't go up until October. So it wasn't directly correlated with that. I thought, oh my gosh, like if that had been directly in line with that, then there's an issue here, but it was not in line with that. So we thought we gave it a quarter to see if it was a little slow, but it's been consistently 2 quarters where, both the number of permits and the fees associated with those permits are, people are doing smaller stuff.
Do you guys do any coordination with other agencies to see if that's like?
Yeah.
Across the board?
Yeah.
Or?
Most other cities have said that is the case, except for River Beach, because they just have a few like big things. They're kind of going all in on some bigger projects happening. But other cities in the county have said that seems to be the case. I will say on the planning side, and this is what we tend to see, when people aren't building and it's hard to get money, people are thinking about what they might build in the future. So we are still seeing stuff come in on the planning side. Like those fee levels have, they're bumpy, like some months it's slow, but we're getting some big stuff coming in. But pretty much across the board in community development, things are down, and in some cases significantly down. What's interesting is this might just be normal, right? We've existed in a period with San Luis Ranch going 100 miles an hour, Rigetti Ranch built out. There's been a ton of these large developments kind of working at the same time. And so some of this might be attributed to just kind of moving back to.
Do you guys filter and categorize that, or is it just across the board, like gross and analyze?
Right now, we haven't, we anecdotally sit at the table and go, okay, like, yeah, San Luis Ranch was pulling, 30 single family home permits a month, and now they're not pulling, and so we look at it, but our system isn't able to say, is this affiliated with a large tract or anything like that. But we will kind of do some more analytics about what are the types of things coming in, what are the types of things that have just fallen off the cliff, things like that.
I guess, because one thing that comes to mind is like, and I don't know if you guys have ever talked about it or not, but like the impact of like the sewer offset, like how many.
We never talk about the sewer.
I know. It's like development, right? Or fine. I'm just wondering like how many projects has that gotten to a point of where like it dies, right? Because people are like, I don't even know how to navigate this, and like, I don't know if it's even appropriate in this meeting, but like I've heard some rumblings that might go away. Like, do you have any updates on?
I can give a
Go ahead.
brief update. So one, we're hoping to come back and on May 15th to the Developers Roundtable and give more of an in-depth update. We have a flow study that's doing a system analysis and modeling of capacities and updating the study that was completed over 10 years ago. And so that's gonna be the major update, but, maybe a ray of hope or sunshine. We are seeing a lot of improvements in the system, and we're really hoping to shrink which areas are capacity constrained with the offset program. Can't share the map yet, but, it's looking that direction, that things have improved. And then we're hoping to really share some tools based on the feedback that we've got in these meetings and others of really finding offsets. I think that's been a challenge. And one way to do that, and again, we need that updated map to really launch this program. But one thing we're talking about is an opt-in, a voluntary opt-in program. And that we have a portal on our website that shows, lateral conditions. The idea would be if you opt into this program voluntarily, you would have a symbol on your lateral that says, I've opted into the program. You got a good inventory if you know where to find offsets. So again, we're hoping to share more in May, specifics, but it's looking very promising. The program's not gonna go away, but we're really hoping to gradually shrink it.
But the data is showing that the areas impacted by the offset are shrinking. So
I think we just gotta notice that fees are going up too. Is that in relation to this, or is that just going up normally?
fees for what?
Parts or like just a normal art bill?
So
The solid
water sewer
waste
rates.
fees, solid waste fees are going up.
So
Maybe that's what I was.
Yeah.
Oh.
Sorry.
So, and we still are not willing to have a discussion of what's written in the first paragraph under that utility and the city verbiage, that in order to be connected to the system, you have to maintain a healthy lateral. Each individual homeowner has to maintain a healthy lateral in order to have rights to be connected to the system. We're still not willing to have that conversation, it's still on the developers.
I think that'll come up again, and it's gonna be at, council's discretion, but, with our update with this project, we're gonna share some updates in May, and then we're gonna be, going back to council probably, looking at in June or July, and we're gonna give the updated, presentation to city council and really kind of take a step back. Here's where we started, these were the options that were presented initially, here's what was decided. Not up to us to make that call, but that is one of the options.
The strategy is
That's
to,
been there for how long?
Yeah.
That verbiage.
Since,
That came first.
right,
The
But I-
verbiage for like that you have to maintain a healthy lateral.
Right.
It's been there for very long.
I think in fairness, that's probably a council issue.
Yeah.
Right, like, I can't imagine putting, and, not that I don't hammer on city staff, right, but I don't know that we could put city staff in a position where they're advocating one way or the other in terms of like pushing that on the developers, or I don't know that you guys are in a position to advocate that way, and that's just kind of occurring to me now, that maybe that's a different conversation that we need to have with council about how much it's hampering development instead of staff, right? Because it's not necessarily fair for you guys to be the arbitrator of it should be on the developer or it should be on the homeowner. Like that puts you guys in a really hard spot. You're already where you are, right? But maybe
Like,
that's where we need to.
advise.
Well, I
It
think
is
that
your
this is the change, like,
Not your department,
What-
but your department.
right.
the upcoming conversations with the champs, that this is back before council.
And these are the options.
Yeah, and here are the options, the
Yeah.
other,
Like one of the examples for like putting back on homeowner is like they go to refinance or sell their home, like that's. But I don't know, if the urgency is like that longer than what you guys are trying to.
Well, certainly people are selling and refinancing quicker than we're building units in these areas. So if it's urgency, that's a different conversation.
And just really quick clarification on that one.
Yes.
I got a call the other day on it, and I remember when I dealt with it a year or two ago, it was just relating to density. But now it's like, did it change at some point? Or did I just not catch it, that it was related to like somebody's doing addition and they had a fixture?
We did make a change last year for single family home
That's the part
projects.
I didn't realize there was a change.
Yep, and the
That's about a year old.
change being if you're adding an ADU or additional fixtures, if your lateral was in poor condition, you could count that as an offset, an on-site offset.
And that's what I think happened with this person, is like, he didn't have to go find somebody else.
Right, so that was
There's different levels to it, I guess. Okay, I'll look forward to your update on.
Basic update.
I think you hit the nail on the head. We started off with a compromise with council. Do we do a punitive and go after those landlords that are leaking, or is there a compromise? That's where we're at right now. And we're transitioning from a chronic state into something that's more stable now. So we've got sensors around the city, and those are all showing positive. So we're hoping that we're identifying the bookend of this program.
You're gonna wanna check in the next couple of days, right?
What's that?
You're gonna wanna check in the next couple of
We're
days.
They're
checking
live.
right
Yeah,
now.
we're checking it out. They're live. Yeah. But thanks for the question.
Yeah.
So thank you. I think my big takeaway from this is please stay involved in the budget process, the work program items. I've said this 1,000 times, but those are the key things of what the department will be able to focus our time and resources on, obviously, other than the day-to-day processing permits, things like that. So that is where you're gonna wanna pay attention to what we're being directed to do and where our time and resources will go. There's another council meeting on April 15th, which is kind of the strategic budget direction where I believe those work program items are discussed. So I will keep you all in the loop. I'll send emails to the Developers Roundtable email list. Once we have more kind of idea of what that looks like, but that's where the work program items will.
Just a
Yeah.
thought, as you guys are thinking about some of these creative ways to like, there might be some changes. And I've never done it, so like I could be butchering this, but I know like in other agencies like Los Angeles, for example, I think there's a certain amount of pre-qualification process where you're coming in with a substantial set of plans or whatever, but you like have an appointment with a building person and like you kind of like do the plan check, you like sit down and you kind of like do a lot of stuff in like a 1 or 2 hour appointment.
Uh-huh.
And from a time management standpoint of like builders were building stuff faster, and I don't know from your guys' standpoint, from a budget standpoint, is that easier to like allocate staff? I feel like sometimes like, does it really just, you submit it, it sits there for weeks and like the person really only looks at it for like an hour or two anyway, right? Like they're not like looking at it every day for 30 minutes at a time, right? So I just,
Yeah,
so I don't know if that's just like too big of a change, or if that could be something in the mix of like, I know as a builder, that would be awesome to like, and clients, if they're like trying to, I can't tell you how many times, like, I tell them like, it's gonna take this long, they're just like,
Yeah.
I'll go hire somebody on Craigslist, and, you know, I'm like, I can't do it, you're gonna do it this way. But
Yeah.
there is probably a lot of stuff happening like that, if the process was more streamlined, where you could just have an appointment, kind of know what you're up against, maybe it turns into a second appointment.
I mean, that's definitely something we can think about. I would say utilize the counter. I mean, it's not an hour-long appointment, just you know, but you can sit and talk through and go back and forth. That's super valuable. Just honestly, one of the challenges we have one plan checker that works at the city. You know, so if that person is in appointments all the time, they're not doing the plan checks, they're not at the counter. So we're a little thin in terms of that, you know.
And
but-
it's been a minute, but are you guys fully digital now, to where everything's submitted?
So for building side, everything should be submitted digitally.
Has that helped from a budget standpoint?
It has helped with like, one, we never did this, but you know, we don't lose things anymore. You know, it'd be like someone left something on that front table and no one looks at it for 3 days.
Yeah,
And
less paper.
so less paper, less, I think, ability to just have things fall through the cracks. And it has streamlined a lot of things for like the permit techs. They're not chasing after people. They're not trying like, where Tyler had this plan set, you know, it's like everybody can see it all at once. You can all comment it at the same time. The applicant can just get shot back, you know, comments. So that has helped a lot. But I like, you know, this is definitely something we can think about as some sort of,
Yeah, even like with, that meeting could be on Teams with a screen
Yeah.
share, and that person could be in somebody that doesn't even live here if you're trying to outsource things and just.
yeah, no, that's valuable feedback. Okay, my updates were supposed to take 30 seconds, and here we are. This was a
Sorry.
great conversation. No, this is good. This is what this meeting is for. But just stay involved in the budget process, please. I think that's kind of the key takeaway. And so now, the housing team's here to talk a little bit about kind of the ADU and subdivision regulations that were taken to planning commission yesterday. I think, David, if just a high level kind of quick overview, but again, we want to highlight kind of the things that we've done for state law and the things that are kind of above and beyond because we've heard their issues, and then taking feedback of like, hey, the height's still an issue, or the setback wedding cake thing is still an issue. Like that's the type of thing we're looking for, so. All right, David.
Hey, yeah, so all the updates that went before PC last night and are going before council in March and then through April were based on new state legislation, most of which went into effect this year, some elements from last year. Senate Bill 477 really took ADU law and shook it up and put a bunch of different new state law sections. So a lot of outdated references that we're correcting. Senate Bill 1211 introduced some more provisions, ADUs. We got Senate Bill 450 creating urban lot splits, similar to SB 64 and 1123. So all this new state legislation creates a lot of different scenarios that are allowed under state law. And so our goal was to just bring the city's code into compliance and hopefully make it a little bit more streamlined, easier for people to know what they can and can't do with their properties. The lot split, we basically organized the city subdivision regulations into major versus minor lot splits. Major lot splits are what's allowed under the new SB 684, applies to multifamily zone properties and then vacant single family properties. Minor lot splits are already allowed under our regulations. A lot of us know it as SB 9. And so that's for single family lots only. The lot split state law in both cases provides that a subdivision is processed in a ministerial fashion 60 days after receiving a complete application. And there still needs to be separate applications for the buildings on the resulting lots. So it's meant to basically streamline that process as getting the subdivision approved if it meets all the prescriptive requirements. And so major urban lot splits permitted in multifamily zone properties that are less than 5 acres, surrounded by urban uses. So really that covers most of the lots in the city, and vacant single family zone properties as well. And each property may be subdivided to create up to 10 new lots with up to 10 dwellings. To go through the subdivision, a dwelling is required on each lot. You can't have like an empty under that rule. And then the resultant lot sizes for a major urban lot split can be no smaller than 600 square feet. If it's an R1 zone, the lots must be no smaller than 1,200 square feet. That's the same for the minor urban lot splits. They have to result in 1,200 square foot lots. And the average total area of floor space for all proposed dwellings associated with a lot split can't exceed 1,750 square feet. That's again just straight from the state law requirements. And major urban lot splits, you can't result in demolition of affordable housing, and you can't lot split a lot that was already created through a lot split, so we can't have like an inception of lot splits. And the city is not required by the law to allow ADUs on lots created by lot splits. State law states that short-term rentals are not allowed. It has to be longer than 30 days. And it can't be used to separately sell existing dwelling units. That's a requirement of the state law. So if there are existing buildings on a site that you propose to subdivide, they have to stay on the same parcel. So that was a requirement that came from state law. And minor urban lot splits, just real fast. It's in our single family zone. It's already allowable. We just made changes to reach compliance with state law, change it. And then for supportive housing, this was an issue that was proposed by our affordable housing developers, where projects that contain supportive housing are allowed by right in all zones within the city. And so we want to clarify that projects that contain supportive housing that are within a commercial zone, there's not a requirement to provide commercial space in a mixed-use development, except for projects that are located in the CD zone or the downtown core, where we want to see that ground level retail. So those projects have that exception. We're just clarifying that. And then the big changes for ADUs, struck down. There's a part of our code that said 1 ADU per lot. That's gone to reach compliance with state law. Changes to the zones where ADUs allowed. They're allowed in any lot that's zoned for single family or multifamily dwellings or mixed use. And those lots have to have an existing or proposed dwelling. And then change to the height limits to comply with state law and the removal of the requirement to match the style, the materials and roof lines of the existing house. That was just based on community feedback, just removing that provision. I will note, obviously, for properties in our historic districts, that still applies. There's still an aesthetic design requirement. And another element that we changed based on community feedback, there's no longer a two-step process if you're wanting to expand or alter a single or multifamily dwelling to create an ADU or JADU, basically converting space. You don't have to build flex space, get it finalized, and then say I want to convert it, and just do all that in one step.
This is, I think, a really good thing we're doing. We ran into this. We understood how silly it was that we would say, okay, you can add space to this house that otherwise complies with code. And you have to call it a gym, and then we know you're gonna build it, then we know you're gonna come back and then add a kitchen. But we had no mechanism to help out with that, and we knew it was so ridiculous. So I hope this does a lot to just recognize, like, if it would otherwise be allowed, and to the outside world, it looks exactly the same, it does not matter. So it's a one-step process. You can come in, show us it's an ADU, and we now have the ability to just say, yes, do that thing.
It is a lot better. It is a lot better.
Yeah, it is a lot better.
thanks.
This will save me a lot of heartache because I understood how silly it was. We just didn't have a mechanism. So I think this one's very exciting to me personally.
And big question that everyone's wondering, how many ADUs can I build on a single family lot? So the scenario allows generally 3, 1 detached ADU up to 800 square feet, 1,200 square feet with director's action. 1 attached JADU on a single family existing dwelling up to 500 square feet. State law requires under occupancy. And then 1 ADU involving the conversion of an existing structure or the proposed additional space like we described earlier. And per state law, if you're converting an accessory structure, you're allowed no more than 150 square feet of new floor space added to that structure to create an ADU. And all the standards of the underlying zone must still be followed with regards to setbacks and height.
So you could have a single family home and 3 ADUs.
Yeah.
Is the short answer to the question of how many.
How many attached can you have?
Sorry, John, go ahead, John.
You can answer Aaron's question.
For attached, that the JADU is where you can have that, and then the conversion or proposed can be used to create an attached. So you could have 2 attached.
Could, again, with the one-step process, could you build a new home with 2 attached ADUs?
The conversion is primarily for existing. The JADU can be for a new home. So that's what we've seen. It's like Sandals Ranch has that 400 square foot JADU attached to it when they build new.
But the code currently is not allowed with these changes to just do like a 500 and 800 and a primary residence all in one structure as a new construction.
No, so that conversion would have to be after it's an existing structure.
But isn't the bullet point before that?
The prior point, yeah.
The prior
But
point
that's
is
for
for
existing.
altering or adding to an existing structure.
So it just worth stating, I would like to do that,
Sure.
like a new primary residence with 2 ADUs attached, and that's just because lots are small.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to not do the detached and attached thing.
And we have thought, we have thought through this issue a little bit, both with multifamily and single family. The idea that, like, the bullet point before is helping a lot of cases, but not necessarily the case where someone says, I'm building a new house. And like right now, you could build a new house with an ADU, there's things you can just do right off the bat, but not necessarily all of those things. So I think this kind of is one of those things that falls into the second kind of grouping of potential changes. There's some other implications we have to think through of this, just proposing new, that were a little more complicated than the adding. But we know this is kind of an issue. And so we have to think through this. It's just, we want to think through kind of all of the things we have to think about for that.
It might be nice, just in theory, if there's some semantics that are like allowing for the designation and the documentation of fire rating in say the garage, so like when he does go to convert that, it's like documented per se. I don't know if they would do that.
So like preemptively knowing that's the
Yeah,
direction
because
you're
that's the
gonna
biggest
head.
thing on the conversion, right, is the fire rating.
Right,
So like
right.
if there's a way to build that into, there's still a little bit of that name calling condition thing, but to verify that everything's built to a certain fire rating assembly would help.
Yeah.
streamline things.
Yeah, that's just a product I'm interested in.
Yeah,
I would
yeah,
like to
yeah, yeah.
do a single family home that has 2 ADUs attached.
I'm confused about the wording of the third point. So are you saying that an accessory structure in what, that seems to imply the accessory structure is detached from the main residence? So does that third point mean that you could have an ADU in an existing detached accessory structure and then build a new detached ADU as well?
Yes.
So in a case where maybe you have a garage, you want to convert it.
A
you could-
detached garage.
Yeah, detached garage, you could convert that detached garage and then still have your detached ADU and attached ADU.
And how much of the garage could be remodeled? Is there a limit to like, is it like the old days in like Shell when you had to just keep one wall
No.
up and you could take the whole thing down and restart?
I mean, the state has specific standards, like you have to be in the footprint of it, and you can't add more than 100. The 150 square feet is supposed to be like access and egress, like, hey, I need to make a porch and like a, an entryway. But we can't stop you, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't wanna say anything crazy here. But if you have a 2,000 square foot barn, the state says if it's an existing structure on a property, you can turn it into an ADU.
Yeah.
No size limit, can be non-conforming setbacks, if it's the same footprint. You get to.
Here's a question.
Yeah.
I'm still not very clear on how these can be used or can they be used in conjunction with each other. So for instance, if you can show a plan using SB 1211, this, can you also piggyback a major lot split to split the lot? And really what that would do is help the developer, the owner recoup value so that they can kind of, after this big build, it doesn't change the plan really. It just, that lot split just inherently adds value to the whole thing and makes it easier to refinance, or, it makes it, it's like a death by 1,000 cuts. I feel like a lot of this infill stuff, it's not one thing, it's not that, it's a lateral thing, it's all of the things. And one of the things is pallet pencils, which is hard to do in infill. But if you could piggyback that way, at some point I read something somewhere where it sounded like you could,
One of the
but there are some catches to that. Like for instance, a major lot split, the city could say you can't do ADUs, but if I'm using 1211 and I can show I can do all of this with the ADUs, now I just want the lot split, is that gonna be allowed, or are you gonna say, no, we don't have to allow the ADUs?
David, you're.
I think a lot of these ADU laws are written to be on a single lot. It seems pretty clear that they're expressly denying through state law, using lot splits to split up homes for separate conveyance and sale.
I'm talking about the multifamily, where actually you can build. So say so the same property, you could go to multifamily, you could go to 2 different ways. You could use SB 1211 and really utilize all the ADUs, or you could use, I'm blanking on the other one, where you could do 600 square feet, major urban lot split, 600 square feet lots even, with up to 10 homes, is it?
Yeah.
So you, I don't know how to explain myself, but.
No, I mean, these are good, and like,
So
one of,
I think what I want to add to it is like where it gets confusing is like, say you have an R2 lot, right? With for one, is the flexible lot going away and this major lot thing is taking its place?
The flexible lot design was really more for the single family zone. The major lot split is what we're going to apply to multifamily.
So the major lots, let's say you have
Unless
a
for R2.
10,000 square foot R2 lot, right? And you have a density calculation of how many conventional units you can put on that and how many ADUs you can put on it. So that's one way you can look at it through the lens of 1211, right?
Yeah.
So how does density factor into the urban lot split? Where is it like, is density really irrelevant and then you can just chop it up to these and you can put X square footage on there, or are you still applying density to all
Like
of
a
those?
common interest subdivision, you only have density.
I don't know how to do the density calculation to the urban.
It would basically be, it would be based on the underlying zone, so it's, you're just assuming you have a newly created lot, and so you're calculating what could be allowed.
And the
on that
size
lot.
of the newly created
Yeah,
lot. So you would take your.
the split doesn't really,
So it doesn't really work in a lot of cases.
it definitely, yeah, it makes the situations where it applies a lot smaller.
So getting back to what Christina was saying, I think the most practical approach to that, if the city can think about this, is like, say you can do what you can do on SB 1211. Obviously, you don't want to double dip and have 20 ADUs, right? But like, whatever the max is allowed in either, like, can you build up to that utilizing the urban lot split? Where you're not exceeding what is the highest and best use of it, but you're able to get some additional lots out of there.
And obviously,
Versus just like saying, like, you're one shorter, like, you
Yeah.
know, not, being able to like somewhat utilize both those would be beneficial. in my opinion, so.
and like you said, the ADUs are not meant to be able to split and sell, which is not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you can end up with the correct density, say you have a duplex density unit.
Yeah.
An ADU, duplex density unit, ADU. Could you not just lot split that? And it's the same amount of housing, you don't end up with an ADU on a lot by itself, but it just helps the owners recoup or re-actualize value to where it's not impossible to make these little projects happen. It's not really changing the amount of output of housing, it's just adding,
The revenue side.
it's the revenue side of what often stops these projects from happening, because you throw something small in front of a small developer, like an urban or a lateral thing or increased fees. I mean, you could pretty well throw something small in front of a small developer and all of a sudden it's not feasible, or if they have to continue to redesign and redesign.
It seems like the major sticking point is bullet point number one, right?
Yes.
It's just, okay, so that's helpful is
Yeah.
the idea that, hey, I have a bigger multifamily lot. I want to make it into 6. I would otherwise have been able to, let's just say, make 20 units. And I want to do that, except it might be 2 units at an ADU, 2 units on an ADU, 2 units on an ADU. So it seems like the sticking point is the state says, we don't have to allow you to, which is where we've landed right now because this is valuable input. But we'll put that on our list for, we don't have to, we can, and if we can, what does that look like?
So what are you guys gonna do with that?
Well, so right now, we're just complying with state law. So actually, is it silent? What does it say?
But what is San Luis Obispo going to do with that? Are
The
you
state law
leaning
says the
towards
city's not
This or
required.
that?
But
Well,
what
they're
is
saying
our,
They're not, they're saying they don't have to. I'm not saying they
Oh, I
don't.
know.
and I guess what we're saying is, what we will do is take this feedback and present it to the planning commission and council and say, hey, we don't have to, but like, here's why maybe it's valuable to developers to do that, and it makes projects pencil more. So I think right now, we just kind of went with standard state law on this, but this is very valuable feedback on why we might wanna look at that and say, we don't have to, but we can. And if we can, are there any parameters we wanna put, like, what does that look, and I think what they're getting at is, you can create pretty tiny lots, so it's thinking through, what does that look like? And I think the benefit of this language from the state is we can, and we can also make sure it makes sense.
So I think a prime example, if I can give one to you, is a lot of R2 lots in particular, I feel like those are like a predominant zone in town that isn't filled. Say you have a 9,000 square foot lot, right? That you don't want to make 600 square foot lots, you want to make 2 4,500 square foot lots. So, but you have 2 4,500 square foot lots, but because it's not a conventional lot split, you're still going off of like a a minimal density calculation. So like that same lot unsplit, I can build up to 8 ADUs.
Yeah, yeah.
But if I split it,
Yeah.
then I can only I got like 2 less units.
Yeah.
But it seems like just take what you could do is the max. So there isn't this like creating some ridiculously small
Yeah.
micro house, but.
And that's how, we could say something like, we could write the code and like, that would allow you to get at least as many units as you had,
Yeah.
would have prior.
And that kind of preserves your guys' sphere
Yeah.
of favela, so.
Yeah, no, this is exactly what we're looking for. This is really valuable because, these are the things that we don't necessarily, as we're thinking through each of these line items, it's helpful to hear what are the things that you're like, actually, we need to do this, or this would be helpful. So this is
Has
definitely.
anybody actually done an application for urban lot split?
For the major lot split?
Major, is there any examples? Yeah.
No.
I think that this is there's another thing hiding in the weeds here about the zoning ordinance in general, and that is, it feels like sometimes if somebody doesn't say that's an open-ended question, it goes into the zoning code that way.
Yeah.
Like approvals, and so a lot of times we're lost at, okay, you have to do A, B, and C to get your approval. It's like you might have to do A, B, and C, and maybe D, depending on what staff decides. And I think that first bullet point is a really good example of that. We've seen where something like that ends up as policy. The city's not required by state law, and they don't take a hard, you haven't taken a hard stance. We are or are not gonna allow it, and it feels like maybe you're doing that to leave yourself some wiggle room to say, on some cases we are, and on some cases we aren't. But that does make it hard for us to envision projects that we know are gonna fit in the box or not,
Sure.
right? And I think there's probably something hidden in there about, we all have had projects come up on second plan check where it's like, oh, you know what? We decided that you do have to go to ARC. Oh, you know what? We staff reviewed it and A, B, and C has come out after we've spent money on stormwater and structural engineering, and after we have to do the project because we have like a lost leader amount of money gone into the design and plan development. Right, so I just want to say that this is a really good example of one of those things that ends up going into the zoning code that ends up being a loophole. And we are always going to take the most assumed density and the best assumed outcome for us if there's a loophole.
You are?
Yeah, right.
But that doesn't mean you're gonna approve it, and then it comes back every time, it comes back, it's like a $40,000 redesign.
Yeah.
And you throw that a couple times in front of a small developer and they're dead in the
Yeah.
water, and it's like, what is the intention of this stuff? You know what I mean? Why are we doing this?
No, I mean, and this is exactly why this conversation should happen, is we need to issue spot. Cause your brains are working on how do I, what would this look like for me in real life? And now we need to clarify this language and pick a path.
Back to my original question, is it your understanding that things can be piggybacked and if there's not a catch like this in it, or not?
I can't answer that right now. I am not as, you mean for the ADUs and the lot split?
Well, that's just one example.
Yeah.
But can they be used in conjunction with each other, some of these different
I think a lot of them can,
can?
unless it specifically says
But the state
otherwise,
doesn't
then I'm gonna
require
have a little asterisk on that and say, there's so many, permutations, what this can look like, and that's part of, to John's point, that's part of the challenge, is everyone is really creative, and we hit things and we're like, well, I never thought someone would piece these things together, and then we have to think through well, what does that mean, and how do we make sure we're interpreting all of those pieces correctly? So it is painful, and I recognize that, and we're doing our very best. I will say, there's a lot of new protections for you in these state laws as well about late hits on comments and things. The state understands that's happening and is, moving in the direction of basically telling cities you've got to hit these timelines, you've got to make sure you cover everything early. And so, that's recognized by the state. We do everything we possibly can to make sure we try to identify things early. And we're getting better at it, but it is so difficult with new stuff that we're we also don't know and so
We're all
the,
working together. Don't
Yeah,
let
and
our
as these-
criticism come off the wrong
yeah,
way, so.
no, not at all, I never think that, this is super helpful, and I think the point of these meetings and emails I get is thinking through like, hey, what about this and this together, one of the homework assignments I said is like, if you've looked at the ADU stuff lately, like, are there still things we're like not clear on, because we talk to ADU all the time. We talk through weird things, I'm like, I never thought someone would come up with this idea, I'm like, what does that mean? And so I think that's the point of these meetings, yeah.
Trying to understand, is the city's hope or goal that people will utilize these new laws and this new zoning code to maximize what their land, the land's a finite resource, right? And if the goal is, let's utilize these new laws and maximize what can be done, because we don't want to squander that land, then could you write into the code that if you're going to follow one of these programs, that it's expected that you're going to maximize the density unless you can prove why it's not reasonable to do so? So you're kind of flipping it on its head. We spent our whole careers trying to fight for the maximum density and always getting parceled back through the process to where you have to juggle it, hey, is it still worth building or not?
Yeah.
But it seems like on this infill subject, maybe the discussion needs to be flipped over and saying, hey, we're doing all these things, we're making an extra effort because we want to produce more housing and more places for people to live. And we're sacrificing R1 neighborhoods to do that. We don't want to squander that.
It's an
Or is
interesting question.
is that too aggressive, too drastic? I don't
I mean,
know.
I've seen minimum densities in cities before. The state also has more recently, probably in the last 5 years, have this no net loss provision where it's like, if you're gonna, and we don't see that as much in this city where if you're gonna tear down 3 units, you cannot build 2 units. Like you cannot lose, which has kind of forced in some places a minimum density because a lot of times there was more density allowed in the 20s and 30s because there were parking requirements, and so it's actually forced cities to move. That's a super interesting question. I think maybe actually where you might get tripped up and we can look at this is if the state says you're adding too much burden on some, like I'm a property owner, I have a multi-family property, I just want 5 units. It's better than the 0 that are there now, and if the city says, no, you can't do this unless you have 10, they might see that as being like so restrictive that we're stopping those 5 units from existing. I don't know, but it's an interesting.
Maybe somewhere in the middle lies the answer, because so often we say, well, here's the building height that you can build in the zone, but nobody ever gets to build that.
No.
Well,
So it's like,
it feels like
why have it then?
there's a stick for max density and a carrot for less density. And maybe that's Travis's point, is maybe the carrot needs to be for max density and the stick needs to be for, maybe it's, because you're not gonna tell people you can't do anything. Right, like we're not gonna live in a world where you can dictate, you can only do this on the lot. You're right, you will absolutely get sued, but the idea of like where the carrot is and where the stick is could be an on its head thing, because that's what it feels like right now. The stick is for max and the carrot is for the minimum.
So I guess for like in this case, what could a carrot be that would encourage someone to make
Easy
subdivide
entitlement,
it to 10 versus 4?
a streamlined permitting process, easy entitlement, less review of architecture and hurdles in the way to entitle.
To attach ADUs.
Yeah.
I would also say, I mean, for all intents and purposes, I mean, we're partners, right? You have a housing element by the state of housing that you have to create extra ADUs, stuff like this, all counts as one. So we are here to potentially build them. But when we're looking at the acquisition price of land, because everything from that point on is a math problem, right? It's, how much price per square foot. So really, your entire profit is really based on the acquisition price of the land, and then everything gets built up from there. But if the price is an extra $40,000 here and an extra $40,000 there, because there's some arbitrary things about what you think you can get away with and what you can't, then you decide maybe not even to do the project, which is where the $2 million shortfall might be in permits, because you look at it and we don't need to spend all of our time to lose money. You know, so we could, I think, create really great, beautiful housing that fits within the scope. And we become partners on how to streamline that to make it more effective for all. You get the required fees you need to run your apartment. We continue to make the city beautiful and safe and proactive. Because there is a finite amount of land, and when it really comes down to it, you are in higher density focus versus urban sprawl. I mean, we're not like Santa Barbara, which is great. I mean, personally, I don't want homes all on the hillsides and stuff like that. I think that it makes our city beautiful. So we need to figure out the best way to be the best partners. And I think we are, and I think, you know, this is why this is all happening.
Yeah, I think these conversations are helping facilitate that, and yeah.
Just to follow up on his comment, I think it's important that you view this through a lens of, you're not helpless if you really want housing, to the interest rate environment out there. Saying, oh, my permits are down 2 million, I've got to, you know, figure out how to do more with less. Because it all goes back to, what can I afford to pay for the land? And if I can't afford to do it because interest rates are higher or building costs are up or whatever, you have a role to play in that, saying, well, if you can build 2 units on that lot instead of 1, then the project makes sense again. And you control that.
Well.
Well,
I
so
do not control that.
what?
The codes control that.
Understand.
Yeah, and the state controls that, that's why I think a lot of this is very good news. Like for you all is, the state has said, cities, we don't even care what your underlying zoning says, you shall allow 10 units on this multifamily, you know, and so, but there are things where we can go above and beyond that, and we have. And so I think these are the things that, as we're sitting here, we're thinking through, and again, taking the notes, so that when we go back and make these cleanups and ordinance changes, we go, hey, we didn't even realize like that this thing was so important for development, like be able to subdivide this land with ADUs on it. And so we're presenting that up to council, because my job is to take what I'm hearing here, take what I'm hearing from, you know, all community members, and present factual information to council and provide the forums for people to share that information, so that council can then say, yes, we agree, change that code, or no, we don't agree, don't change that code. So don't make me more powerful than I am. No,
but you do play a role in it, right?
Totally, and I will say, and I've said this 1,000 times, I completely understand how process and uncertainty can help her through the process. I totally get it, and I thought what was very telling is the question I threw out as the homework is like, what is one code section you want to change? It was very deliberate, like, give me a code section. I just want a thing I can read and we can decide if we like it or not and get it out of here. And half the comments were about process. And we'll talk about process too, but I think, you know, there's so many pieces of this, but I totally get the process thing and the uncertainty aspect. And I think one of the things we're trying to do with this code cleanup is remove some of the uncertainty, like make our language more in line with state law, because that was a problem. People are like, the state says this, your language is outdated, it says this, I don't understand, I can counter. People didn't understand, you know, and then I think, you know, David and the team will work on what I hope we can get pulled together is like a guidelines document in plain English. This is what this means, you know, this is, you can have an ADU and a JADU and attached ADU on a single family lot. You can do this, you know, so it's referencing the code language, but it is a clear document that is user-friendly for the layperson to be able to understand what we mean by that.
And one last follow-up question.
Yes.
Reading through these, there's a carve-out that often requires at least one of the units to be your primary resident. Did that go away, or is that still part of? And if the goal is to create more housing, what does that matter?
So if you have a JADU, it still has to be owner occupied. That's a state requirement.
So did that come back? Because the
Why?
state forced that out at one
For
point.
JADU?
Yeah,
You know,
I mean,
Still a
just
state
my
requirement.
specific experience, we
Yeah.
built Noveno.
Uh-huh.
And this was early ADU days. This is when it was like brand new. The city required us to say it had to be primary residence for either unit. You could live in either unit, but it had to be primary residence. Then the state law changed and said the cities weren't allowed to do that, and we were able to get those agreements rescinded.
Uh-huh.
And those,
For ADUs or
now, I don't know
JADUs?
that JADU was a thing yet.
I think that's
They
the
were
thing.
attached.
Yeah.
they were effectively JADUs because they're 450 square feet attached to the,
So I think the
Unit.
trick is JADUs don't have to have fully independent living facilities. And so what I think the state is getting at is if you could build a JADU where someone needs to access the home for like a kitchen. And so what they don't want is you to rent out to two different people, and it's a renter issue of, I don't have a kitchen and this renter, let's like the property owner understands they are renting out that JADU and will share whatever is the common, because that's, I think, JADU isn't just the size of it, it can also be the fact that it doesn't have fully independent living facilities.
but it can have fully
It can.
independent,
And
and
you
you can
could
still
call that-
call it a JADU
Or I would
because,
say call it an ADU, and then you don't have to, I mean, I think that's the.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
I still want to get back to getting to
Unless you wanna
two
try
attached
Still,
ADUs.
it's still, that's still silly though. We live in a world where everybody lives in LA, can't afford to rent an apartment. That not only each person lives in a, lives in a separate room, sharing common living
Yeah,
spaces,
yeah.
but they share bedrooms because they can't afford it. You
Yeah,
got
no,
complete strangers renting a
I
bed.
understand,
at that
so
time.
we'll clarify if it's state law, I mean, the only reason we would have that now is because the state law says it, and I think that there's that weird thing with JADUs is because it can have shared kitchen.
Yeah,
Could it have shared bathroom as well?
Yeah.
And so I think the issue is, again, if you have renters, you then are having a situation where one renter has a bathroom and could restrict access to someone who has rented a unit that does not have a bathroom. And so I think that's kind of, but I would just give them a bathroom, call them ADU, and then you don't have that problem.
But then you wouldn't be able to do two.
That, I mean, that's, yeah. Two attached.
Well, it sounds like you couldn't do two, one attached and one detached, because the one attached wouldn't it have to be a JADU?
No, you can do an attached ADU and a detached ADU.
yeah, so JDUs, that third option, the state's where now unit has that owner occupancy requirement, so. JDU has that size limit, that smaller size, it's kind of intended in that certain way. The owner occupancy is a requirement, so it's just a different product that the state is allowing that to.
Yeah, state, we're looking at state law, it is required to have owner occupancy for JADU.
Yeah.
And I think
I'll send it out.
That's the only one?
that's the only one,
That'd be super
JADU.
helpful.
I think that's really helpful.
Yeah.
So, my understanding of JADUs is that they were in kind of direct difference of what they're saying, is that JADUs were never meant to help with housing. That they were meant to help with affordability for the homeowner. And in that spirit, they did not put a 30-day minimum restriction on JADUs because it's not meant to take care of housing. It's meant to help the homeowner have an affordable property. But based on last night's meeting, it sounds like you're gonna write back to the state and say that you would like to keep the 30-day minimum rent in place.
Yeah, we are not interested in, at this point, unless we hear otherwise from council or from planning commission, which I don't think we did, but we see them as providing a form of housing.
But that was never what JADUs were meant for. They were meant to make it affordable for the homeowner to live in their home. Like from the very creation of JADU, that's what. the
And I think that
whole
could be
thing was.
achieved through short-term rental or long-term rental. I mean, that's a policy argument that can be presented to council. I think we've had people who have said, actually mostly about ADUs, but not JADUs, which is, I don't like that I can't rent out my ADU for short-term rental.
Right,
And
there's gotta be a certain amount of protection. But for JADU, that was meant to be like a stepping, like for people to be able to afford, which obviously short-term rental brings in more income than not short-term.
And that's a fair, that truly is a fair kind of policy argument. Our take has been just preserving housing stock wherever we can. And so that's why we wrote back to the state and said, we would really not like to not restrict JADUs because we see them as the valuable housing.
Housing.
Yeah, But someone could make the argument, and people are, we got written correspondence from people like, please let me rent out my ADU, you know, or my JADU.
So when we're talking about like budgeting, and specifically with ADU verbiage, it seems like we've spent a lot of our budget kind of fighting policy, that state verbiage that is like, why are we beating our heads against this stone wall? Like, it's state verbiage, we don't need to change it. Like, why are we even writing that in that letter? It's state law.
It's not state law, the state didn't like that we have that, and so we explained why we have it. And they have to review this, and they might say, we don't care, let people rent out their JADUs for short term, but we've made the case of why we think it's preserving a housing stock in the city. And so the state will review this, and it's possible they come back and they don't agree with us, but given the major city goals and kind of the policy direction that I have received on short-term rentals and housing, that's the argument we made to the state. The state could disagree.
So in the context that it is maybe meant for homeowners to make it more affordable, and by removing the ability to do short-term rentals, would you then consider maybe removing the requirement that it be deed restricted to owner occupancy?
I can't, state law says it has to be owner occupied if it's a JADU. We're looking at it right now.
Okay.
And I truly think it's because of that shared
Right.
bathroom kitchen situation.
But I guess I read that state law, to your point, state law, they said, it looked like HCD's letter said, it is the law that these are able to be short-term rented, and we specifically didn't put a limit on that. So I don't understand, and maybe it's just a stronger law that they're owner occupied and a more of an interpretation about the short-term rental, maybe that's the missing link here. Because in the HCD letter, it sounded like it did say that was a requirement.
They wanted us to remove that. We're making the argument of why we think it's better for the housing stock. They might reject it. So, and this is, again, this is valuable if we get to that point, and, or even if we don't, even if the state says, okay, fine, good argument, we're fine with that. This
Yeah.
still might kind of come out as a result of this second round of stuff where enough people are saying like, no, this is how I can pay for my house, that it might change kind of planning commission and council's math on short-term rentals.
Because it doesn't restrict them from doing a long-term rental.
Yeah, it just
Gives them
opens,
the ability
yeah.
to have
yeah.
the flexibility.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to short-term rent if they don't have to.
Yeah, no, and I think that's kind of the policy stuff that we're in the world of
I
hearing.
think you really have to look at the idea of housing. That's not housing. That's visitor serving. And that's
Right,
not
but it was
housing.
never
And
meant to
that
be
is
that.
like, it's got a huge impact on our housing stock right now. And what your comment about all housing counts, doesn't matter whether it's high end or not. And I forget, I was in one of the economic development or economic updates that we do every year through the chamber and SLO, I forget what the other organization is. But anyway, they say any housing that you build increases the inventory, and when there's more inventory, there's more competition for it, and everything works. You know, because you trickle down. Everybody has to start somewhere, and if you cannot build an affordable unit. It's just impossible. You
I
have,
think-
an affordable unit is a unit that has existed since it was built cheaply, and it's in the stock now, and someone has moved out of it and now it's affordable. Or maybe it's a mobile home or whatever it is, but it's really tough. And the other thing, I got a little comment on sprawl. There are unintended consequences with sprawl. One of them is response times for emergency response times. I see Todd has left, but that's a big deal, and it drives cost to the city.
Yeah.
Because we had, in fact, in the old days, when we went across the tracks over there on Laurel Lane, it had to put a separate fire station there just because of the railroad track being an obstruction to response time. And now we've got San Luis Ranch. I think, we've got other things where they're outside the limit of where we could respond quickly. So that's a huge cost, not to mention the extension of utilities, which is another one.
Yeah.
I don't know, there's a lot of expensive sprawl, and then you don't want to be able to the hillsides. You look what happened in LA, look at Pacific Palisades. There was inaccessible places where you couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
Really tough.
Yeah, I mean, and this is helpful, and I think some of it is just a policy decision, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
the rental of the ADU and the JADU is a very interesting kind of policy decision. We will present that information up, but ultimately, it's like which one most aligns with our current major city goals and the direction that the community wants to go. So it's,
if we go back to the, I don't want to get too nostalgic, but working on the downtown plan back in the early nineties was a really great experience. And one of the things we put in that plan was lots of upper level housing like even in the CD zone, a lot of upper level housing that wouldn't require parking, for instance, which is more like a San Francisco. I had the fellow in my office, Doug, I think is his name. He manages the Weinman Hotel. There are lines waiting to get in there. And they're just little efficiency units. There's no parking. People are waiting in line to get in.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. There is a market for it.
Yeah. Okay, we have 2 minutes.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. I appreciate everyone kind of holding on to it.
Oh.
Was there anything huge we missed, David?
No, I think we got to it. We didn't really talk about the multifamily ADUs, but basically you're allowed up to 8 ADUs detached from the main dwelling. It's equal to the amount of existing units. If you have a 4-plex, you have 4 allowable ADUs.
There you go.
There was confusion on whether they have to be individually detached. No, the ADUs can be attached together. They just have to be separate from the main structure. So if you have a 4-plex with a big parking lot, you could double that, put another 4-plex of ADUs on that parking lot. And conversion to if you have existing space in a multifamily dwelling, you can convert that into an ADU, and it's up to 25% of the amount of existing units. So if you had a 4-plex with some additional space, you could convert that one and create one ADU.
Okay, thank you, David. Appreciate it. Next steps is council March 4th. Again, it's gonna be an iterative process. So we'll take all this feedback and feed into likely a cleanup item. We might also hear back from the state that, when you submit this for their review, that they want changes or further changes or don't like something. And so with that,
Yes. Sorry, Timmy, just quick question. I'm just wondering about the feedback from 1 or 2 folks that say, hey, we want, to be able to have short-term rentals on JADUs. I didn't feel like that was consensus of this body. It's certainly not something I would be interested in.
No.
How do you end up putting that into, to the council report so they don't think like, oh, the, developers roundtable asked for blah, blah, blah.
yeah, we actually, the funny thing about this one is the council item is already in flight for, so we had to catch it and add in what the planning commission did last night. But likely what we'll do is kind of a verbal at the planning commission meeting, at the city council
Maybe
meeting.
some things that you
Yeah.
heard, gotcha.
Things that we
Okay.
heard, and honestly, these things did come up at the planning commission in written comments and I think verbal comments, and so they were talked about. And the whole thing, I just want people to, I've said this, I think 1,000,000 times, but our main point here is just to comply with state law. That's why we're like running 100 miles an hour trying to get this back to the state. But we will have further conversations about these other things, because some of them, the things that we were like, this is low hanging fruit, like the double step turning into 1 step. We were like, we're comfortable with that. Let's just move that forward. Removing the shape and form and style, that made sense. Some of these other things, we were like kind of seeing them come up, and I'm like, we need to dig into that and understand what are the implications. If we really want to talk about short-term rental, we need to be able to present planning commission and council an idea of what does that even mean, right? And so we didn't feel like we had the time to delve into some of these more meaty items and also get the state back our compliant version of the AU law. So that's gonna be kind of second step. And so that's the other thing we'll tell council is like, yeah, we heard additional things, and those are things we're gonna have to kind of work on because we didn't really have time to do that and try to get in compliance with state law. Yeah.
Fire sprinklers, now that the fire people left, unfortunately. My understanding is now if it doesn't have fire sprinklers, you're not required to put fire sprinklers in it.
If the single family, if the house existing doesn't have sprinklers, we can't require you to put sprinklers in the ADU.
Yeah. We're done.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it.